Hello, I'm Oliver Colling, and this is my 70s TV childhood. Hello, and welcome back to my 70s TV childhood, the podcast which looks back to a different time, a time in which I grew up, and a time in which television played a central part in my childhood and in the life and experiences of UK society in the 1970s. Now, this isn't just another show where we say, weren't things great then, and aren't they terrible today, as that's far too sweeping a generalisation. The truth was, the UK was a country in trouble during the 1970s. Union unrest, 3-day weeks, Dennis Healey having to go cap in hand to the IMF for a bailout, all of which were, frankly, a bit depressing. And that's before I mentioned how I and my family were dressed in family photos from the time. As respite from the realities of life, television was a uniting factor which brought families, work colleagues, and the whole nation together and gave us something to lift our spirits and to take us away from the drab day-to-day. Thanks again for all your comments. I do enjoy hearing from you. Special thanks to all of you who've been sending good wishes following my recent bout of COVID. I am absolutely fine, thank you, and I'm grateful not to have been too unwell with this awful disease which has caused so much sadness across the world. And so to today's episode. I'm going to try something a bit different today as I am on holiday. So, attempting to make our first episode recorded outside the studio. I hope we won't have any difficulty with sound quality, etc., but let's see. I'm on the lovely island of Jersey, which is in the Channel Islands for our US listeners, rather than being in Jersey. And as I'm in Jersey, there can really only be one subject for our reminiscences. So what a great excuse for revisiting Jim Bergerac and the Bureau des Etranges section of the Jersey Police Force. We can remember Charlie Hungerford's dodgy dealing, the glamorous nightlife at Diamond Lil's nightclub in St Helier, share the frisson of Jim's flirting with Lisa Goddard's diamond thief, whose name I forget, and take in lots of lovely Jersey sights. Except hang on, problem here. Bergerac did not appear on air until 1981. Which I do find hard to believe, as it did appear to be an archetypal late 70s creation. So I'm afraid it does not qualify for my 70s TV childhood. So I need to think again. My Family and Other Animals has a Jersey connection, but I'm not sure I remember enough about the 1970s version. I know. Let's take a look at holiday television. It's remarkable how many times we come back to this subject in our reminiscences. I think it's largely because those special programmes were the only things which were meant for us on TV, and, as such, bring back very happy memories of childhood. In previous episodes we remembered the Banana Splits, White Horses, Belle and Sebastian, Robinson Crusoe, and of course Hergé's Adventures of Tintin, amongst others. These shows were shown again and again and again, across the Christmas, Easter and summer holidays. This was a very clever move, and I suspect it meant that these programmes were very cheap programming alternatives from the BBC, as they were able to use the same shows, as I say, again and again and again. This meant that children who grew up in the 50s, 60s and 70s, and probably the 80s as well, watched the same shows. And then the BBC came up with a masterstroke in scheduling. Let's start showing the shows that our parents grew up with at the cinema in the 1930s and the 1940s, and they started showing the big-budget Hollywood-produced cinema serials which had entertained my parents. Earlier, I spoke to one of our regular listeners, Paul, from South Wales, about this. So I'm delighted to be joined again by Paul, who's joining us from South Wales, who is one of our regular listeners and a regular correspondent to the show, who we last heard from on the subject of Hanna-Barbera cartoons, as well as growing up in South Wales. So welcome back, Paul. It's lovely to have you with us again.
Thank you. Back by unpopular demand. Yeah, requests by the millions to be back as Mr. and Mrs. Millions living down the road from me.
So, I had lots of responses to previous discussion on Hanna-Barbera, but there was something else that we corresponded on when, a lot of memories that I and many of my contemporaries, I think you included, well, what used to happen in school holidays when we had, and Saturday mornings when we had actual programs for children, in and amongst the normal sort of oasis of the desert of daytime TV, which didn't really exist, particularly on the BBC. No. And one thing that you brought up was the number of the old 1930s, 40s serials that we used to get played every morning. And I think that it really brought back some memories for me of watching things like Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers. Do you want to tell me a bit more about your memories of those serials?
Yeah, they're very vivid. We discussed before some of the very old serials like Casey Jones, or seem very old to us, and Champion the Wonder Horse, and my mother remembers watching as a girl in the 50s. And though I didn't mind cowboys, I had a Lone Ranger toy, and used to work for a bank as part-time. He was a Lone Ranger, but I won't go into that. What I enjoyed more were even older ones that were shown in cinemas as serials, science fiction and fantasy ones. And I still remember the Larry Buster Crab, Flash Gordon, very clear. The actor who played Ming played him quite scarily.
I remember extremely scary. I do remember. Yes, yeah. It was really, really quite unpleasant.
He wasn't he? And he was more memorable than, say, Larry, who was a typical American square-jawed hero, but he was a sports star, I'm sure, so he played him well.
He was. I mean, he was the sort of all-American boy, I think, wasn't he?
Yeah. The titles stick with me even now when I haven't looked this up on the internet or even the book or anything. The 3 Flash Gordon serials were Flash Gordon. Well, it took a while to work that one out. Then Flash Gordon's Trip to Mars, an ambitious little title. Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe. So,
yeah, well, obviously, it's ranging in scale.
Yeah,
working up to conquering the universe.
Yeah, onwards and upwards. And although the effects were good for their time as well. Yes, the robots seemed literally a bit clunky, but good for. And there was footage of waves destroying the Earth that was used again and again, but still for the 30s, very impressive, I'd say.
Oh yeah, pretty good. I remember my dad used to say that he used to see it in the Saturday morning cinema club in the 1930s, and it was he was finding it very, very exciting. I mean, one of the things that I used to remember, it used to be slightly frustrating, was the fact that every episode was, I don't know how long were they, about 10, 15, 20 minutes long?
Yeah.
And the first 4 or 5 minutes was a recap on what had happened previously.
Yeah.
And then the last couple of minutes were a preview of what's going to happen next, leaving about 10 minutes of plot in the middle. And then always leaving us with a big cliffhanger to say, will Flash get out of here? Will whatever. But made us come back for more, even if we thought we were a bit more sophisticated when we got to a television sort of watching age.
Yeah, it did. There was a simplicity I think we liked with it as well. It wasn't just good versus evil. It was futuristic, and futuristic I think always appeals to children. If you're looking at the wider context, again, being Mr. Pretentious, critical theory, sci-fi was really big in the 70s. You had films like Rollerball that our parents liked, and of course comics, 2000 AD, came out in
Yeah.
77, and of course
Yes.
Star Wars was a sci-fi, heralded the sci-fi boom completely, didn't it? It was absolutely massive. So, and then, of course, Flash Gordon became a film back in 1980 then. There's always been an interest in Flash. And Buck
Yes.
Rogers as
Yeah.
well, yeah.
Now I seem to remember Buck Rogers again was Buster Crabbe, wasn't it?
I think so, yes. I think you're right
Yes.
there.
And it seemed very similar to Flash Gordon from what I remember.
Yeah,
Although I think the premise was that he'd been stuck in time and woke up in the 25th century. I think that was.
that's it, yeah. Again, and Gil Gerard brought it back in the early 80s then, and he was one of our great eyebrow actors, a bit like Roger Moore.
That's right. Yes. I used to like that.
Yeah,
It used to be on Saturday tea time, and I used
that's
to
right.
enjoy that.
Yeah, a spoiler for Doctor Who, because it was put on exactly the same time as Doctor Who, and as if to say, you can't watch two sci-fi programs at once in the days before binging.
Yes, you have to choose. Yes.
Yeah.
Please note any of our younger listeners, we did have to choose sometimes between which program we were going to watch. And I know some of you still can't believe that, but do listen on to that. Just going back to the classic serials, I seem to remember there were some early versions of sort of more familiar superheroes like Batman and Superman.
Yes, there were in the 30s and 40s. There was George Reeves played Superman. Poor old George Reeves came to quite a sad end, really. But he wasn't the most muscular of men, really. But he did his best, and on a very low
I remember
budget.
it didn't quite fill out the suit. Not really on the Christopher Reeve kind of scale.
Yeah. And we had the Batman. I can't actually remember the actor played Batman's name, but I remember his suit as being rather moth-eaten for a multimillionaire.
And then you mentioned George Reeves came to a bad end. What happened to George?
Well, he was the official line was he committed suicide, but he might have, a lot of Hollywood gossip, he may have been murdered by his lots of stories going round about it.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Dear. I hadn't heard that. I'll have to go and have a look up and see what happened there.
Yeah.
So how do you think those serials compare to, I mean, today we can't move for superhero films and TV programs and all kinds of other stuff. What do you think was different between those 1930s serials and the sort of things we've got today?
I think there's a lot with scale, and there's a lot of emphasis on big battles, and there's, in a way, I think we've lost some of the innocence, we've lost some of the simplicity, because watching Superman versus Batman a few years ago, and I'm a fan of both. I'm a bit of a comic collector as well. I was even more in the 70s. I'm sure you remember Oliver, all American full colour comics, and you'd go to the news agents, and I remember the smell of them. But Superman versus Batman, I thought, was really boring, because all it was a long, extended, violent fight scene, and I thought they would have had that in
that was that. No, so all a bit different. No, it's fascinating because it does really take me back to school holiday mornings, just thinking about those serials. And even though they, as you say, the special effects were a little out of date, they were still pretty spectacular for the 30s. I just feel myself back there, just relaxing and watching those and thinking, oh, I wonder what happens next.
Yeah. Yeah, it left you coming back for more. And of course, we were not to be sexist about it, but I think as boys like the superheroes, and girls tended to like the more horsey ones, like White Horses and Follyfoot, and they're always.
Yes, I think that's a fair comment.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Well, Paul, thanks for joining us again. That's really good to get some insights on those serials. And thank you again for listening. And really good to have you with us.
I should keep on listening. And best of luck with the next show. I should be listening with interest as ever.
Thanks, Paul, for your memories on those serials. They were hugely impressive in the way that they worked, and must have made quite an impression on 1930s children. My late father remembered watching them as a child in Lee as part of the regular Saturday morning cinema club he went to, and I remember that he was slightly surprised that I was watching them so many years later. Flash Gordon is the one that sticks with most people, and I have to agree with Paul that the effects were quite something for their day. The rocket ships were loud and shot out huge clouds of sparks, and some of the various aliens involved were pretty frightening or impressive depending on your point of view. The monkey-like orangopoid, which appeared at some point, was particularly scary, I remember. A bit like an exhibit at a freak show. Of the other aliens, the largely good-natured winged birdmen of Prince Vultan were a notable addition, flapping around Mercury-like whilst initially supporting the Emperor Ming before realising the error of their ways and coming round to work with Flash and his chums. Emperor Ming himself, played by Charles B. Middleton, was truly wicked and frightening, as recalled by Paul earlier. As the ruthless leader of the planet Mongo, he displayed little compassion in dispatching enemies without a by your leave, and his pronouncements to the screen were truly chilling. I can imagine rows and rows of 1930s cinema goers, including my father, booing and hissing when he committed yet another awful deed. The spirit of these serials lived on beyond the 70s, and was lovingly captured in the 1980 film version of Flash Gordon, with the unforgettable Queen soundtrack, and the deadpan performances of a host of Hollywood's finest, including Sam J. Jones as Flash, the great Max von Sydow as Ming the Merciless, and our own Brian Blessed as Prince Vultan in, I think, what must be one of his most remarkable roles, as a winged warrior wearing a helmet, breastplate, and what looked like an oversized nappy. Anyone of my age only has to hear the opening beats of the Queen theme to remember Brian's performance and his contribution to the top 10 selling record during the famous dialogue. A General Carla, Flash Gordon approaching. What do you mean, a Flash Gordon approaching? Open fire! All weapons! And then Brian chips in. Gordon's alive! Marvellous stuff, and apologies, Brian, for the terrible impression. The Buck Rogers serial, as I mentioned earlier, seemed just like Flash Gordon to me, only the difference being that the hero had been in suspended animation and woken up 500 years in the future. But it too was a hit in its day, and provides happy memories of school holidays of the 70s. It also prompted the revival of the character in 1979.
The year is 1987, and NASA launches the last of America's deep space probes. In a freak mishap, Ranger 3 and its pilot, Captain William Buck Rogers, are blown out of their trajectory into an orbit which freezes his life support systems and returns Buck Rogers to Earth 500 years later.
Gil Gerard as Buck and Erin Gray as Colonel Wilma Deering popped up in the revival, and the first series was a landmark of Saturday tea time television. It played to the Star Wars agenda that TV and cinema were desperately trying to compete against, and to be honest, it was pretty good. A mix of adventure, comedy, and in the first series the sadness of Rogers realising that everyone and everything he had ever known was long dead or destroyed. An intelligent piece of drama all round. The second series went a bit downhill for me and involved Buck and Wilma going into space on a big scientific discovery vehicle, think sort of Star Trek or Battlestar Galactica sort of vibe, and it didn't last much longer and was cancelled before a third season could be commissioned. Do you remember Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers and the like? Did you enjoy them or think, as a friend of mine did at school, that they were ancient rubbish? Let me know on our blog at www.my70stvchildhood.com, tweet at 70stvchildhood, or email me, oliver@my70stvchildhood.com. That's all for now. My remote broadcasting appears to have held up, so take care and join us again soon for more from My 70s TV Childhood.